You come across a lot of strangers. When you're trying to explain to them, how would you explain? How would you introduce yourself?
We can't just show up and say, I work on clinical trials. Maybe you would do that if you want to just scare people away or turn them off quickly. But, I'm sure half of my family still thinks I'm a drug rep, so I'm not sure I'm necessarily. So, when my kids were born, I always fell back on the same kind of quote that I try to bring into my day. Spike Lee movie, always do the right thing.
Have you had any moments where it was difficult to follow that? Correct me if I'm wrong. Did I read somewhere correctly that you are a Swiftie as well?
I am a Swiftie, and
you are?
Absolutely.
If you look back on your life, what's the most adventurous thing you think you have done?
I think when I was young, starting at around 14.
Where did you grow up, and any fondest memory from your early ages? How have you seen yourself grow or change as a person over the years?
For me, that was like the stressful time of, a decade or so of trying to figure that out. Right? Am I supposed to be a musician, a physician? What am I supposed to be in this continuum? It's funny, like people will say, like, why do you do the work you do? But so much of it is just inextricably linked to just my own personal journey. It's a period where this is something weird, some whittling, and now I've got a Dremel, and I'm very excited to see what I can do with a Dremel. It's like a therapy session. So much of it links back to empathy. I think it's very easy for us to say, well, I have my own life experiences, and therefore these are the experiences that I should follow. I like to track stuff on a spreadsheet, and therefore the right answer is people should track stuff digitally. If you're happy in what you're doing, success will follow. So for me, success is that first half of the equation of finding that thing that you're happy doing, that you enjoy doing every day. Mm-hmm. The challenge for many of us is, can I find a way to do that and make a living doing that?
Like you said, something is going at a light speed, but some other projects or anything requires more patience, and it is going slower, and you need to change your roles accordingly. So how do you do that?
Think about like a non-drug portfolio in pharma. All of the innovative opportunities, process improvements we could be doing, it's stuck in a funnel. It's not what's the next discrete thing we put in the funnel, but how do we fix the funnel to get all these opportunities through in a responsible way. An individual patient's journey starts with controlling their own data. So there's transparency that we have to keep doing a better and better job of making sure people can see what we're doing so that we can earn trust that's lacked. What I find is if people are very excited to say we have to bridge research, healthcare, bridge this divide, then it's like we're building a bridge and it doesn't have a landing place, right? And there's many incremental things that we're all still trying to do, but it's still just so hard to create lasting positive change in this industry today. So the next challenge that I'm looking more and more of my energy into is
what would be your advice for people who are thinking about getting into clinical research? Welcome to People of Medicine podcast, where we explore the science of modern medicine through stories of people who are working tirelessly but behind the scenes to make modern medicine a reality. Namaste. This is your host, Dr. Aarti Bhosle, and I'm thrilled to have you join us here today. Together, let's break down barriers and explore the human side of science. welcome to the inaugural episode of People
I'm
of
looking
Medicine
forward to the
podcast.
conversation. Yeah,
Yeah,
yay.
I know. When I first thought of the idea, I had you in mind. I mean, as one of the guests, because I do look up to you, right? And so I was like, how cool it would be if I could, start the podcast with you.
Well, we'll have some fun, and there's lots here you have for us to cover.
All right. So, I mean, the intent of this discussion is basically just, exploring the stories of people from clinical research, but the stories behind the persona. Like in clinical research, we all know each other, right, within the industry, right? And we all have these identities, these personas, and we understand each other. I mean, when we go to a lot of conferences or webinars, we understand each other's talks. But I mean, if you try explaining what you do to anyone other than not in clinical research, it's not fun, right? And I had all these experiences, various one, and so I changed my approach. And when you kind of do that, people connect and people understand, and so that's when that one of that aha moment was like, we need to do this. Like we talk about all of this, like we need to raise awareness about clinical research and the field itself in general public. But how do we cannot, I mean, just use shop talk to do that, right? I mean, yes, marketing and all of that, I mean, that's good, but what I have experienced is a great way to connect with other people are those stories and genuine connections. So that's what I'm trying to achieve through this podcast. All right, so let's begin. I mean, let's start with introducing yourself, but not in a way, how we usually start. Oh, introduce yourself and all of that. I have a bit of a different take on it. We fly around a lot, right, for conferences or other meetings and all of that. You come across a lot of strangers, and this has happened to me certainly, like I mentioned. When you're trying to explain to them, how would you explain it? How would you introduce yourself?
It's a great question, right? Because we can't just show up and say, I work on clinical trials. Maybe you could do that if you want to just scare people away or turn them
Yeah.
off quickly. But you can't get into, a 15-minute slide deck with a stranger on the elevator or sitting next to you on the plane. I do try to set up a little bit that I work on testing the new medicines that we all rely on to make sure that they work the way we think they do. But I'm sure half of my family still thinks I'm a drug rep, so I'm not sure I'm necessarily winning at that battle.
I hear you. That struggle is real, right? I mean, my family and friends, I don't think they still understand what I do, especially my kids. And so I'm like, okay, well, this is another way of exploring that and kind of explaining what we do, right? And what it is about. And so it is funny. And
I
I've
always
had
got to
all these.
take Artie when we would have dinner. My especially as I've been working at home for the last few years, but when my kids were younger, and at dinner time when they would try to mimic back to me what they think they hear me talking about on work calls from the office at home, and
Yep.
it was usually clinical trials, blah, 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 innovation, blah, 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 patient this, blah, blah, blah. And then invariably they drop like a name like Munther, who was my tech business partner at Pfizer for years. And that's what you do all day. And I'm like, well, maybe it does kind of start to sound that way. Clinical trials, blah, blah, blah.
I agree, because that's the experience I have. Like, and try explaining it to a VC. Oh my God, it has been interesting in a lot of scenarios. And so I was like, okay, we in the industry think everybody in the world knows what we do, but they don't.
And coming out of the pandemic, I think we kind of all hoped that more people would have some better sense of what we do. And I think maybe that's true to a certain extent, but there were also all sorts of unsustainable expectations coming out of the pandemic of what drug development looks like, and that somehow we can magically compress these years that we've been saying it takes to do what we do down to a few seemingly minutes. And then, I think also coming out of the pandemic is this reminder for us all that even those that might understand a bit of what we do doesn't mean they trust what we do. And so the barriers of not only explaining what we do, but also countering misperceptions and misinformation that people may have about what we do and how we do it.
I agree. I mean, I have heard that many times, like after pandemic and how fast the COVID vaccines were developed, right? And then if you try to explain like it takes 10, 12 years, they're like, wait, what? That doesn't make sense. Like, and so, yes, there is a gap there. But I agree with you that post-pandemic, the understanding or the awareness about clinical research, or at least some part of it, has improved because it brought the topic to the forefront and it became a household conversation for a while, right? And so I always kind of lean back on that to give an example when I'm trying to explain what I do, right?
Perfect.
All right. So a bit different approach. Usually all these rapid fire questions or quick facts are done at the end of the show, right? Why not do it at the beginning of the episode? So here you go. Feel free to answer what you feel comfortable with. What always something puts a smile on your face if you would have to think back? What always works?
Part of the joy of working from home are my office mates, a couple of golden retrievers that let me share the space with them, and seeing them first thing in the morning is just always a joy. They just look at you like they thought that they would never see you again. And that always brings me joy. It's a fabulous way to start every day.
Isn't that just amazing? I mean, it's a great start to a day. It's always, it puts you in the right mood and it just, helps deal with the day. That's amazing. Any favorite quote or mantra you live by?
When my kids were born, I always fell back on the same kind of quote that I try to bring into my day. Spike Lee movie, always do the right thing. And that line of, you're going to have difficult decisions to make. And I would tell my kids this even as they grew older, just try to do the right thing and let that be your guide.
That's an excellent to live by. Do the right thing, even though it might not be easy all the time. Have you experienced that? Have you had any moments where it was difficult to follow that?
Fortunately, I haven't had very difficult decisions where following that role really led me into a challenging space. Some of that may be because I've been fortunate to surround myself with others that I think have managed to believe this and prioritize this, maybe without articulating it to their kids as much as I do. But if it is a challenge in a decision, whether to do the right thing or to have to do something else, then I think it's a good litmus test for us that our either our priorities or the environment or culture we've created is not the right one.
I agree. That's a great advice. So I'm glad you didn't have to face that. I mean, I hope you don't.
Have you found yourself either now or in the past running into challenges like that, of having to try to either temper expectations around what you think is right versus what others may think is a greater priority?
Yes, I mean, those are life experiences that happens, but yeah, still doing the right thing has never been a challenge, right? I mean, yes, the feeling that it's unfair, yes, but that is different. I mean, that's a feeling that sometimes is associated with the experience, but your values are what carry you through. That's what I trust in and I believe, and I stick to that. That always helps me because situations like that can arise. They have, and even in future, yes, there are going to be times. But I always depend or fall back on my values. So
Yeah. Yep, I'm with you there. I think there's another quote. I think I'll butcher it, but it went something like, it was an airplane sentiment. It was, your right to recline your seat ends when your seat hits my knees. And I think it's just a reminder to us that, like, we deserve autonomy and we should be, making sure that we're doing right for ourselves and our families. But, that ends when we start to encroach on the knees of somebody sitting behind us.
I agree completely. I mean, that is such a wise, way of of approaching things, because yes, I mean, freedom is for everybody, right? And it's everybody's space. We should respect that. And so that's a good one. I'm gonna remember.
And be comfortable, but look out for the knees of people around you, right? Like,
Agreed.
Yeah. Especially it feels like this is going to already shape up to be a very polarizing year in this country, in an election year. And let's just, make sure you're comfortable, but look out for the knees of people around you.
I agree. That's a good one. How about a family tradition or a memory that you cherish?
A family tradition for us that's getting harder and harder as the kids get older now. They're in college or getting close to that, both of them. The day after Thanksgiving is a day of movies in our family that, it's kind of verboten to leave the house. Most of the days, you keep your pajamas on, and most of the movies we pull tend to be like 80s, 90s. Movies that make the playlist. Sometimes we've skewed a little more current than those, but it's kind of fun to kind of just have a tradition like that with a family. And I think my kids, they're at an age where I'm sure they could be off doing something more fun than that, but they it's their rule now that we stay in the house and keep that going.
Agreed. A generation gap always plays a role, right? And when we were kids, we thought it was unfair, whatever the parents wanted to do. And all now that we are in parent roles, well, guess what? The cycle goes on. So I understand, but I appreciate you sharing that, because yes, family time, it's a way of bonding. And so that's it. Correct me if I'm wrong. Did I read somewhere correctly that you are a Swiftie as well?
I am a Swiftie, and
you are.
Absolutely. And if you're not a Swiftie, it's only because you haven't become one yet. But I think her music, her story of Taylor Swift, the way that she's taken back control of her creative content, and the way that she's cultivated a community of fans that support her doing it, I think it's just tremendous. Not to mention that the songs are fun, so why not?
They are. I've been kind of getting exposed to that a lot because of a preteen daughter. So I remembered you had written this somewhere. Okay, let me ask him. She's gonna be happy to when she sees this. But
absolutely,
it's gonna be Mama. See, I told. I know I'm gonna get that. So that's awesome. Do you have any favorite song of hers, or any other book or movie or TV show that you it's your guilty pleasure, or even that you like?
I've been watching a lot of Curb Your Enthusiasm lately, mostly because I'm an old Seinfeld fan, and I feel like every day there's something in my day that makes me, or at least every couple of days, and I think back, that's like a Seinfeld episode, and then it just comes back. So maybe it's because I just feel like my days, maybe all of our days, feel like some episode of Seinfeld from the past.
Yeah, I hear you, because I am a fan of the shows from that era, and which my kids think is old, but I'm like, no. But yeah, I hear you. Awesome.
I think they've aged well. Yeah. Hopefully, like the rest of us, hopefully they've all aged well.
I hope so too. I hope so. If you look back on your life, what's the most adventurous thing do you think you have done?
The most adventurous, I guess, should I think of something like current or worky? No, you know what? I think when I was young, starting at around 14, I started to travel in the summers with a youth orchestra. Okay, it's not as adventurous sounding as traveling with a band, but you know, I'm a little nerd, so yeah, it's going to be an orchestra, not a band. But I was 14, and I wasn't able to fly with the group to their first destination, which was all the way in Tahiti. And so I had to fly and meet the group there on my own, which, nowadays throwing a kid on a plane with a cell phone and an iPad doesn't sound so crazy, but I was like a 14-year-old with a trombone in a suitcase, headed off to meet the orchestra in Tahiti. But it was a great experience. We stayed with host families in all these countries when we were traveling around from there in New Zealand, Australia, Tasmania, and other spots, performing along the way. And it was just a wonderful way to experience these different cultures and different communities, by living with families for extended periods. It's certainly something that I hold dearly.
That's amazing. I mean, doing or taking on this kind of adventure in the era which was pre-technology, it just feels surreal at this moment, right? I mean, that just tells you how much technology has embedded into our lives, and things have changed. You don't notice it every day, but that's amazing, man. Really, at age 14, that's really cool.
It was a nice adventure, and I traveled for other summers with that group in the years after. But yeah, thinking back now, would I throw my 14-year-old, then 14-year-old, on a plane without any way to get in touch with them? I guess the world was different back then. Maybe, who knows?
Yeah. So, any other places which have left, or basically you wanted to travel but haven't got a chance yet?
Well, I think the travel that, the more recent travel that left a mark on me was a trip we took with the family to Iceland. And some of that time involved climbing on a glacier, which sounds like a cool adventure. But, many who know me know that I have a rare pulmonary condition called pulmonary sarcoidosis. We're recording this in April. April is Sarcoidosis Awareness Month, so all the more reason for me to mention that. And so that affects my pulmonary function, and I get intimidated by things that involve large trips uphill. And that could be up a flight of stairs in the New York City subway, where I fear I might be a little out of breath when I get to the top of the stairs. And certainly the idea of climbing a glacier. And look, I didn't climb it from the base all the way to the top, but, took my time and made it to the peak that I wanted to. And that was an adventure for me, and felt right for me.
Okay. So did you do any preparation for it, like knowing the condition that you have, but you still wanted to do this? Did you do anything special?
No different than what I ordinarily do in terms of, whether it's different exercises for my breathing or otherwise, related to nutrition that I may know helps my breathing in different ways. But really, otherwise, just giving myself permission to go my own pace, which, sometimes I think we all struggle with. It feels like there's a lot of things moving fast around us, and sometimes we don't give ourselves the capacity to think about the pace that we want to go or may need to go.
I agree. I mean, that's a great piece of insight, Craig, because even though you're talking from the aspect of climbing and breathing, but it does apply that allowing ourselves to go our own pace is very, very important, because certainly in today's world, it can feel like it's going at 1,000,000 miles per hour, and it is easy to get overwhelmed in the situations, right? But it's allowing yourself to follow your own pace is a way of self-care. And I think that's a great way, and it should be prioritized. So that's awesome. I mean,
Yeah, it's a
that's
nice way of
great.
looking at it as self-care. And, look, just because we may choose or need to do some things at one pace doesn't mean everything in our lives is now defaulted to that speed, right? There are other things that will continue to put at our own light speed, and certain things in our lives that maybe we deliberately have to throttle a bit. And sometimes it feels hard to have a mixed portfolio of speeds going, right? But
Yes.
maybe that's the right thing, especially
Yeah,
if we don't want to burn ourselves out.
I agree. So how do you manage that? Like, changing the pace. It's not that easy. How do you kind of go about it? Because sometimes, like you said, something is going at a light speed, but some other projects requires more patience and it is going slower, and you need to change your roles accordingly. So how do you do that?
I wish I had a good answer for you. I tend to be impatient. I tend to be impatient with myself, with our industry. I tend to want, not, it's interesting. And when I had jobs in large corporations, they used to not only encourage, but almost incentivize people to say no to more things. That's like how you move up in the business, is being the one who says no. And I kind of called BS. Like I want to be the person who finds a way to say yes. And, sometimes that means I know I push myself or others maybe at an unfair pace for some things, but, I also, I don't know, RD, I feel like, we have a privilege working in the field that we do. It's a privilege to do this. There are people that are depending on it. I remember a story once from a while ago. I won't name which sponsor it was, but a patient, there was a contract that a site was waiting on from a sponsor in order to get a study going. And a patient kept asking the folks at the site, why isn't this open? Like, if my tumor progresses, I'm not going to be eligible for this study. When is this thing going to open? And they would say, well, we're waiting on the contract to come back from the sponsor. So the patient just picked up the phone, looked up, the phone number for the sponsor company, and got somebody from contracts on the phone and just started letting them know, like, if you don't get this contract back to the site, I may lose the opportunity to be in this trial. And like, what a great reminder of this sense of urgency for all of us, no matter what role you're in. You might think that you're not in the front lines, you're just a contracts person somewhere in the back office. Like, it's that type of urgency for all of us. And so maybe as a result, I'm not really good at pacing things until I find myself out of breath, where I have to stop for a minute and catch my breath. And I probably just push it all over again.
Well, thanks for sharing that. It's difficult to find that balance because, yes, we, especially being in this industry where we all feel that, and we are all striving to get things done faster. But you're right. Sometimes some roles, I mean, it's easy to forget that. And until we kind of, are hit in the face with those realities of, like patient stories like these are, I mean, it shouldn't be that way. They shouldn't be, those wake-up calls. They should always be at back of our mind. And so, yeah, that takes a conscious effort. Thanks for sharing that insight. So, all right, I mean, we're trying to know the CRAIG behind the shell, right? So would you mind telling me, where did you grow up, and any fondest memories from your early ages?
I grew up in the suburbs of New York on Long Island, about 30 minutes to the right of New York City. Now I live about an hour to the left of New York City. And, I was one of three boys, the middle child, so people can analyze what that means, as maybe that makes me the peacemaker. And for me, growing up where I did, a lot of memories linked back to times in Manhattan, and slipping into Manhattan, whether with family or friends, and the experiences and travails of wandering the streets of New York City in the late 70s, early 80s,
Mm-hmm.
which definitely looks very different from what it looks like today in a lot of ways. What about you? Where did you grow up?
Well, I was born and brought up in India. I am from a small town surrounded by mountains and nature. And so, yeah, it's been a journey from that point to where I am right now in Houston, Texas. So it's been quite an adventurous and interesting journey, a lot of life experiences. But yes, I mean, my childhood is something that I look upon fondly. I mean, some of my fondest memories have been summers with my friends, and a lot of seasonal traditions in India and all of that, including food. So much food, and and so my childhood was before technology, so it was those human connections, playing with friends, and being out all day and just enjoying life, and building those connections, and a lot of life lessons learned without even giving it a thought, right? And so that's one of my memories. And another one is, there is a favorite temple in my hometown in India. So I used to go there on certain occasions with my father. I loved going there, but since I was a kid, he used to take me, and so those memories, those talks have been, yeah, they are etched in my memory book.
And do you still have family back there that you've been able to go back at all
Yeah,
in the year?
yeah. I mean, my parents' generation, yes, they are still in India. They have their roots there, their social network, all of they have lived there their whole life, and so yeah. And but my generation, cousins and myself, yes, I mean, spread across the world, but yes, I still have family and ties back in India.
That's nice. Very nice.
Yeah. So, I mean, talking of childhood and growing up, how have you seen yourself grow or change as a person over the years?
I think I was always a bit of a tech nerd, although
Mhm.
maybe a tech nerd, entrepreneur. My brother and I had a business in high school where we sold computer supplies. So maybe that was my blend of tech and an entrepreneur back then. Floppy disks and computer paper. We'll see who in your audience remembers these disposable supplies. We used to bid for the school district contracts for supplying our own high school with floppy disks and computer paper. Honestly, but most of my evolution just as a person over the last couple of decades has been kind of linked in a lot of ways to my journey as a patient in tracking and understanding my own data and my own health data as it relates to my experience as a patient. It's informed a lot of the things that I prioritize and how I spend my time. Professionally, a lot of it links back to my personal experience. People will often say, well, what did you study in grad school? And what does that matter now? It's more my experiences as a patient that are
I
informing
agree.
how I work today than experiences that I had 30 something years ago when I was in grad school. Even whether it's the stuff with decentralized research or data enabling patients, it all links just back to my own experience as a patient and the communities of patients that I've engaged in my own journey. And so I think that's been a lot of just like, it's funny, like people will say why do you do the work you do? But so much of it is just inextricably linked to just my own personal journey that, they kind of coexist, as kind of one thread to me now.
That's great that you kind of um, count on those life experiences and derive insights from them to kind of make yourself a better professional. And I do the same, because it's I mean, yes, personal professional lives are different, but in so many ways or at so many intersections, they they mingle, right? Or they have effect on each other. And so it's a great way of kind of applying those lessons either ways, in either direction, right? So that's a great way of doing that. So when you do that, or while you're doing that, what are your values that you know follow basically, or are your North Star in a way that you always that's your foundation?
I think so much of it links back to empathy. I think it's very easy for us to say, well, I have my own life experiences, and therefore these are the experiences that I should follow. I like to track stuff on a spreadsheet, and therefore the right answer is people should track stuff digitally. And I think the right answer is like having empathy that different people will want to track or engage or do whatever the X is in different ways.
Mhm.
And so I think the mistake we can make from our life experience is to take that and just extrapolate it, that no one
Mhm.
will want to use an app for this because I didn't want to use an app for this when I was in that situation. And I think, we
Yep.
all run into people in our professional lives that kind of fall into that camp. But,
Mhm. Mhm.
I think that for me, the right values link to take my own life lessons, but make sure I have visibility and empathy for others around me that are also developing life experiences, and appreciate that there will be more than one right answer for
Mhm.
different types of people. Some people
Mhm.
like, I used to say, some people like a Palm Pilot and some people like a day at a glance. Okay, that's a little dated. I don't know that day at a glance books still exist, and
Mhm.
obviously Palm Pilots aren't around. But some of us like paper calendars, and some like to do it
Mhm.
all online. And that's not
Mhm.
it's not one right answer just based on the way you happen to like things. Sometimes I
Mhm.
feel that even leaders I worked with in large pharma companies might fall into that trap. People won't like
Mhm.
X because I don't like X.
Mhm. Mhm. I agree, and that's so true, and so applicable, right? Basically, because that's how all of these biases are formed, right? Because something it and it you usually have your own personality to fall back and relate, and so you think the world also is the same, right? Well, maybe in your own mind, but that's not the reality of the world, and that is really valuable that you know you practice that uh, the empathy, because practicing empathy is not easy, because I mean it is one of my values too, compassion and empathy, and putting yourself in someone else's shoes and thinking from that perspective. I think it is not just a value, but it's also a very useful skill, right? And it makes you helps you understand the given situation better and come up with better solutions, because you're thinking from all different perspectives. It makes you a better professional and a better human as well, right? Because you have that mindset of thinking from all different angles, and then you are able to recognize those whatever, I mean, it could be hurdles sometimes, or it could be perspectives and all of that. And so it helps you take a proactive approach rather than being reactive to something, right? So I mean, outside of work, what are you passionate about? Or are you following your passion through work?
I mean, as I mentioned earlier, I really feel blessed and fortunate to work in the field that I get to.
Mhm.
I'm incredibly passionate about getting new medicines for patients that are in need.
Mhm.
But I majored in music as an undergrad, and so
Mhm.
I always have to
That's
find some creative outlet to sort of channel things. There's only so much just talking and emailing I can sort of sustain, and so I go through different phases. And while at one point it was more music, and then I tried other types of creative arts. I think right now it's just other things with my hands. And,
Mhm.
there was a period where, this is going to sound weird, I was into whittling, and where you sort of just use a knife and a little piece of wood or a stick to try to build things. And now I've got a Dremel, and I'm very excited to see what I can do with a Dremel. And maybe there are folks that are going to listen to this and will want to drop me ideas for getting started with a
There
Dremel.
you go.
And
Mhm.
if a Dremel is just like a little handheld tool that has a bunch of different nibs and tips you can add on the tip
Mhm.
for
Mhm.
doing,
Mhm.
whether it's fine engraving or other types of
Mhm.
projects. It's a if it's a craft maker's geek toy, and I'm looking forward to getting hands on with that. You know who inspired me to get fired up with that?
Uh-huh.
Alicia Staley, that some of your viewers may know or want to follow.
Yeah, from
Alicia,
Medinator. Uh-huh.
right? Alicia's
Mhm.
fabulous, has an amazing patient story, and
Uh-huh.
she also has an outlet that for her is hands on with things, and she was doing some cool things with a Dremel, and I just wanted to follow Alicia.
Well, that's awesome. I mean, so that would be great. I would love to, you know, look at any outcomes of those when you try it out.
It might get ugly. We'll see.
It doesn't matter. It's the attempt that matters, right? I mean, and I'm not just saying this to you. I tell this to myself too, because I kind of struggle with that, right? Like when you try something, it has to be perfect and all of that. It's the trying and the journey at what matters. So is that something, I mean, this creative side of yours is how you kind of deal with stress, or do you have any other ways? Because yes, stress is a part of our life. I mean, so
It is. I don't know. I don't. I I I am good at not carrying stress with me. I am good at kind
that's
of
awesome.
leaving leaving it behind. Like I'll stay up late. I'll do what I got to do because I want. I'm doing this because I want to, right? Not because I feel stress or pressure externally, like forcing me to.
Hmm.
And so maybe that mindset has kind of helped me a little bit. I'm not sure. I've never really thought about it
Yeah.
that way. This is like a therapy session. Thank you. I'm
Yeah.
gonna have to pay you at the end.
No, you don't have. I mean, it trust me, one of my intents of doing this is also therapeutic, even for myself, right? I mean, it's a way of connecting with people. So, I mean, but has it always been like that? I mean, I know you said that, kind of you do things that you want to, so you don't feel stress, and I agree that, because but for me, for example, like it took me a while to get to that point. Maybe, I mean, I don't know, and that's just a part of life, like, growing in a career, or there is an age factor, there is an age factor of your career as well, and all of that. And so now I'm at a place where I'm doing what I enjoy, right? But it took a point to get to that. And yes, stress goes down when you're doing something you really enjoy, and it doesn't feel like hours have gone by and you don't realize, like, whoa, okay. But have you experienced, has there been a point, or earlier years or whatever, where that wasn't the case and it was stressful? Or have you always been fortunate to kind of uh you know follow
Yeah.
your what you what you like
I,
and do
I
what
think
you like?
I think like a lot of people, I started my journey with these very wide error bars and not really sure what I was supposed to be doing. A
Yes.
lot of people our generation didn't enter the field of clinical research. It wasn't really laid out as an option. It's interesting for my kids today. I see these like bachelor's degrees in clinical research in their college
It's
programs.
amazing.
Wow,
Mhm.
that didn't happen when we were in school. Um, so what did we do? We kind of would like try doing something until we realize we don't like it, and then we'd maybe, pivot a little bit until you hit something you don't like. And so you kind of throttle back and forth, and maybe those bars get more and more narrow until you finally land in that right space. And for some of us, they're fortunate and maybe they land there quickly, and then others it takes a while. For me, that was like the stressful time of, a decade or so of trying to figure that out, right? Am I supposed to be a musician, a physician? What am I supposed to be, in this continuum? And, once I started to find it, it definitely took the stress away. Like there's always those other stressors in your life of, can I make money doing this? Can I feed my family? Is this a sustainable industry? Is it going up? Is it going down? Will I be able to find work that I enjoy? But, these are realities for many of us. But at the very least, if you've landed in that lane where, I really care about this field, I'm passionate about it, it makes it a lot easier for those other pieces to kind of come online. If you're really passionate about it, you're going to do well at it. Like the other pieces will start to get in line, and I don't want to dumb it down or oversimplify it for listeners that may be struggling at different points in their career, especially right now, this crappy down market for a lot of folks getting displaced. And that's, an unfortunate truth that so many of us in our community have been going through. But if you really are passionate about this, and it will connect, because your passion will be reflected in the work and in your performance, and it will connect. It's just, right now it just may be a little trickier for a lot of listeners.
I agree. And so on that note, basically, so then that's how you would define success. I mean, how would you define success beyond the normal parameters, which is like, salary or job or money or any role or title or whatever, achievements, awards, anything beyond that? I mean, which is...
I did have one advisor as an undergrad who told me, if you're happy in what you're doing, success will follow. If you are happy at collecting trash on the street, then maybe you're going to eventually, run, a massive, trash collection operation or some other, other community effort. Like if you're really passionate at doing what you found, success will follow. And, I've continued to believe that. And so for me, success is that first half of the equation of finding that thing that you're happy doing, that you enjoy doing every day. A challenge for many of us is, can I find a way to do that and make a living doing that, versus that being sort of a hobby or adjacency. And so for many of us during our careers, maybe we have a day job doing this that my boss pays me for, but how can I start to develop this other, muscle and skill set in this other area where I'm really, excited. Nobody hired me to be like head of innovation for blah, blah, blah at a big pharma company. Like on day one, those jobs, there was no such job. Like we created that at Pfizer when I was there. But what did I do? I was like a study manager and was finding ways to get exposed and take on some of those other areas where I knew my passion truly lied, that leaned in around the innovation and the technology and the new processes that we could bring in. So like it's trite for me to tell folks, like, just do what you're happy doing, because you got to keep the lights on. But part of doing that is finding ways to kind of build these bridges from what you're getting paid to do now to what those things you could start to bring into your portfolio of work, that you'll then start to make it, well, that's 10% of my job, 15% of my job, until you hit that tipping point where suddenly it's 51% of your job, and then it is your job.
I agree. I mean, you certainly read my mind, because, okay, well, yes, following your dreams, I mean, we all want to do that, but there is a reality factor of fear, and that fear is based in all of these, right? I have a family to feed, I have kids' education. n number of things, and it not just be materialistic for yourself, but genuine life needs, right? And you're right, like it's not easy, like nobody's going to hire you for whatever your dream is, like, on day one. But it's a great piece of advice that you gave, that start making room for it, and grow into it as while doing, like, yes, you have one thing that you're doing because it's a part of your responsibility towards life, but then you also, if you are passionate about something, find a way to incorporate that into your life, and eventually it will find a way to kind of uh, be your life, right? There will come a stage if you follow that passion. So that's amazing. And so I know you've already created a legacy for yourself, but at least, I mean, in this industry, and we all look up to you, Craig, but what is the legacy that you would want to leave behind in your mind?
There's a lot of incremental things that we're all still trying to do, but
Yeah.
it's still just so hard to create lasting positive change in this industry today. And
Yeah.
so the next challenge that where I'm putting more and more of my energy into is appreciating and accepting the risk aversion of our industry and of pharma. How do we acknowledge that risk and acknowledge that pharma really struggles to adopt innovative approaches?
Mm-hmm.
And so if we can acknowledge that and kind of accept it,
Mm-hmm.
then and what other channels can we start to open and create for how to create sustaining positive change? So if it isn't going to be pharma companies that are able to make that change, then who will it be? And if
Mm-hmm.
it is going to be pharma companies that can make that change, how do we de-risk things to make it easier to be
Mm-hmm.
adopted and implemented, whatever the it is? Maybe it's AI or decentralize this, maybe it's other patient access and experience opportunities, whatever the it is.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever it is today, it's going to be too hard for pharma to adopt. And so
Mm-hmm.
how do we either do a better job of de-risking it or create adjacent spaces where those opportunities can thrive and flourish? That's kind of the next challenge that I'm building up towards today.
Mm-hmm. That's great. I mean, because and it's an important one, because it's the foundation of the entire industry, right? Like, and the future, or the direction that the industry would go into. I agree. If we continue being risk averse like this, we all know that we need to change. And so, but also, like you said, I mean, this is where all those skills of empathy and all of that come into place, putting yourself in other shoes, right? Like, we complain, or we feel the effects of being in a risk averse industry, but there are reasons for it. And so you're right, like whatever the it is, it has to address the root causes of those of the causes that are leading up to, or having an effect of risk averse, right?
We have this funnel challenge in our industry today, and we often will think about funnels with our portfolio of medicines and funnels when we're trying to enroll patients and move them through. And so think about like the non-drug portfolio in pharma, the non-drug portfolio in development, or all of the innovative opportunities and process improvements we could be doing, risk-based monitoring and remote monitoring, or better use of analytics, or whatever it may be. Whatever it is, it's stuck in a funnel. And that funnel, we keep adding new things to the top of it. AI and Gen AI and other opportunities are at the top. But in truth, what's getting out the bottom of that funnel? What's made it out of the bottom of our funnel that we've been able to implement across our organizations across the globe? Electronic data capture, ETMF, like what else have we can't even say ECOA at an
Mhm,
enterprise level globally. So we keep adding these things of decentralized and e-consent, and they're all stuck. There's either too much friction or it's too narrow, whatever it
mhm,
is.
mhm,
That's the legacy that I want to fix. It's not what's the next discrete thing we put in the funnel, but how do we
mhm.
fix the funnel to get all these opportunities through in a responsible way?
Agreed. That's amazing. And I believe and I agree that that is the right approach. Because yes, all these amazing things are coming out, but if we want our industry to benefit from that, we need to work, like you said, on clearing up the funnel first and fixing that pipeline. Otherwise, nothing is gonna get through. And so
That's true.
it's
And
it's
there may
it's
be
our
some out there
loss.
that hear that and say, "Oh, I work at a site and you're going to break me," or "I work at a CRO and the sponsors will never do it." Or there's always a lot of reasons why we can't.
Mhm,
Fixing the funnel doesn't mean we're creating a tsunami and just, opening the floodgate, right? We still have to do this responsibly and in a stage
mhm,
gate way and in an inclusive way with different voices and different perspectives.
mhm.
Full stop. But the problem still exists today that nothing is getting through. And
Yep.
so there is a broken machine there that if we don't fix, we are going to be doing studies exactly the same way with little tinkering at the edges of process improvement. But
Mhm.
it's broken. It's not working.
Yeah. Hmm. It truly is broken, and this is a great segue into the kind of the clinical research side of discussion because I do want to raise awareness about the fear, but from a general public's perspective, right? Because and so there is a lack of awareness around clinical trials, right? Even I mean, in our industry, we are familiar with what's going on and all of that. But do you think there needs to be some clarity and awareness around what clinical research is in general public? And what are your suggestions around how we should approach?
This is a tough question, right? Because we get all excited about the details and then we end up scaring people away because we
Yeah.
start nerding out so quickly.
Yep.
But
Yep.
there
Yep.
is, awareness that's missing just around and research literacy to a certain extent.
Mhm,
There's transparency that we have to keep doing a better and better job of making
mhm,
sure people can see um,
mhm,
what we're doing, so that we can earn trust that's
mhm,
lacking. Um, we need to improve participation and support for people in this process. There's a lot of steps in this, but for many, the piece that's missing is an invitation. People want to learn about research when they're learning about other treatment options for whatever medical condition they're facing. Of course, there are healthy volunteer opportunities.
mhm,
Everybody can sign up for platforms like all of us. But for most of our clinical trials, we're looking for people who have a diagnosis and they want to
mhm,
learn about research when they're learning about other treatment options from their treating
mhm,
physician. They
mhm,
don't, we see the study after study. People are learning about research on the internet, but that's not where they want to. They want to
mhm,
learn about it from their doctor and care team. And so
mhm,
there is a broken piece of the equation at that time of decision making where we
mhm,
haven't created the right alignment with healthcare providers to have
mhm,
informed conversations with patients that include opportunities for research. Now, part
mhm,
of it is because we've created this dichotomy that either you're a physician providing care or you're an investigator, and all
mhm,
the systems are different and everything kind of breaks, right? you're
mhm,
you're a patient talking to your doctor and they're entering things in your medical record, and then you have
mhm,
to sign a consent, and then everything changes. Now you're
mhm,
a participant slash subject talking to an investigator, entering things in a case report form. There's just so much friction in
yep,
this. And
yep,
so I really think, yes, it would be great to say, let's mobilize everybody and get everybody aware of research. But for many,
mhm,
they only care about health decisions at that point that it matters in their life. And the
mhm,
stakeholder that tends to be there with people is a
mhm,
healthcare provider. How do we help to activate those providers to be able to have conversations with patients? Now,
mhm,
I'll throw out one breadcrumb that I'm particularly excited about because
Mm-hmm.
I am a decentralized trials nerd. And the DCT draft guidance from FDA last May creates a
Mm-hmm.
role for healthcare providers to participate in research with routine care activities. And I
That's
really think that's
amazing.
going to help to unlock opportunities in our field. My wife is a family physician here in New Jersey. She's never been a PI. She will never be a PI. She has
Mm-hmm.
patients that we would love to enroll in our trials. You're not going to get them, right? If she's going to make a referral to a specialist, she's not looking to see who's enrolling in a clinical trial for patients with, you know, with
Mm-hmm.
challenging diabetes or
Mm-hmm.
obesity issues before she refers them. She refers them to people in her network that she trusts. And so, how
Yeah.
do you kind of fit clinical research into her
Mm-hmm.
process and in her decision making around referrals?
Mm-hmm.
It just becomes a part of how she's treating patients. And if she can still just support routine care activities while the patient's in a trial, all of a
Mm-hmm.
sudden there's space for her.
Yeah.
Otherwise, trying to get her to pluck patients out
Mm-mm.
because a team from
Mm-mm.
Merck thinks that there's a trial that they want one of her patients, it just doesn't
Mm-hmm.
work. No offense
I
to our
I
friends
I
from Merck,
agree.
I'm not picking on
Mm-hmm.
them.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree. I mean, thanks for sharing that because that's the reality, right? The reality of the healthcare setting out there. And you're right, there is a dichotomy between clinical research versus healthcare, whereas they are the same industry in a way, right? I mean, they are part of the same bigger industry, the health industry, if you want to say. And this we need to understand this and work on this where clinical research has to be a natural fit and part of healthcare. Only then things are gonna, move. There needs to be this thinking when we bring these solutions and when we update our processes to kind of, understand this and acknowledge this and accept this. So
Yeah,
that's
what I keep
that's
seeing this
yeah.
really smart forum where people talk about clinical research as a care option. And what I find is when I'm looking around the room in those spaces, people are very excited to say we have to bridge research and healthcare and bridge this divide. But then all the people in the room are from research. And even if they're from a health system, they work in clinical research in that healthcare setting. And so we have all this energy talking about building a bridge between research and healthcare, but we don't have the people from healthcare engaged in the room. So it's like we're building a bridge and it doesn't have a landing place right now. And so
Yep.
I think we have to find ways to open up our conversations because look, healthcare's got its own problems, right? It's not
Mm-hmm.
like they've got everything figured out that they're
Mm-hmm.
ready to just say, research
Mm-hmm.
with all of your issues, come on
Mm-hmm.
in. We've got a spot
Exactly.
right here for you. So
Mm-hmm.
the notion of bridging research and healthcare sounds really good to us on the research side, but I think now we have to start doing a better job engaging with different types of organizations involved in care delivery, health systems,
Mm-hmm.
federally qualified health centers, community health clinics, other
Mm-hmm.
settings, so that we can understand what do they need for research
Mm-hmm.
and care to kind of converge in this way.
I agree. I agree. You have to kind of, listen to that perspective and design accordingly. And you're right. I mean, that's the right approach. And so, but from in all of this, like these are two sides of it, right? I mean, research and healthcare, and we are all working for patients, right? I mean, that patients are at the center of all of this. And anybody can be in that situation, including us, right? God forbid, but it can happen because anybody can be on the other side of the table, right? And in that situation, like, would you really tell to somebody who's listening, who might be a patient or on the other side, is there real value in giving clinical trials a thought or talking about maybe are there any potential trials with your provider, like is there real value in it, because there are a lot of myths out there, or people, or just because it's too complex, people don't even want to go that path, including physicians, and the patients trust the physicians the most, right? So how do you deal with that? Like what would you say to those people? I mean,
I mean, for most people, and I think if we're honest, ourselves included, if there is a known treatment option that has
Mhm,
data and evidence to back it up that we haven't yet tried, we would want to try that next rather than be enrolled in a clinical trial that at best randomizes me with a 50-50 chance to the known versus something that's unknown. And so for many of us, research becomes more a path of last resort when we're starting to feel we've exhausted our treatment options. Now,
mhm,
for a lot of medicines we're developing, that's right. Right. If there is an existing standard of care that's meeting the needs of patients, then
mhm,
you should be focusing your energy on unmet needs. And it tends to
mhm,
be why, cancer treatments, for example, will start in third line before working
mhm,
backwards to second and first and so
mhm,
on.
mhm.
Um, but yeah, for most of us, we're going to wonder first off, what other treatment options exist for me before going down this path of the unknown? And
Mhm,
honestly, what's the amount of risk and burden that's involved? Even if it's non interventional research, I was asked to enroll in a research study. I live about now an hour and a half to the left of New York City, and I was asked to enroll in a study at NYU where they want to just draw blood to try to understand a certain how a certain imaging study was predictive of a certain outcome over time. Seemed
mhm,
easy enough. I'd done the imaging
mhm,
study,
mhm,
um, but they were like, "Well, you gotta come in for blood draws." I'm like, that's a 3-hour round trip for me to get a blood draw, right? Like, if there's
mhm,
no other way for me to, so even there, just to participate in something non-interventional, the amount of burden that was not taken into consideration for that study just made it out of the question.
mhm.
Just to collect a tube of blood from me. And you and I know, and so many of your listeners know, there are a lot of other ways that one could collect a specimen locally, short of
Mhm,
asking me to drive 3 hours round trip to give it to
mhm,
you.
mhm.
But for most interventional trials, what's really kind of in it for me?
Yeah.
I think there's also a commitment that we as research sponsors need to follow through on in terms of what the give is back to the participant. They should
Mhm,
have access to their data. They should
mhm,
have access to the results from the study. And
mhm,
quite honestly, when the drug is approved, we have to make sure that these individuals who supported the development have access to that drug.
mhm,
And so that
mhm,
doesn't just mean that we're getting it approved in their local markets, but
mhm.
when we have access programs that we're standing up, we have to make sure that the people that were in the trials are,
Yeah.
concierge delivered to the front of that line because they earned it.
Mhm. I agree. I mean, and that should be the case. And yes, I mean, because they are contributing towards and they are, a part of this, so there should be more transparency around this. So and that's a way of empowering patients. So what would you say to people who are considering clinical trials, like patients, right? I mean, I'm talking from that perspective. How would you tell them or recommend them to advocate for themselves, right, patients, and empower themselves in the context of clinical trials or even healthcare more broadly? Like, what would be your advice to people in this case?
So much of an individual patient's journey starts with controlling their own data. And so,
Mhm,
step one during their journey, especially if it's a complex diagnosis that has them traveling through many different providers with different specializations, sometimes those providers being in different healthcare systems, it falls back on you, the patient, to have custody over your data so that
mhm,
you can improve your ability to get the right answers and find the right options. And it's
mhm,
unfortunate, but fortunately, there are better and better tools for all of us as patients and caregivers to have access to gather, to download, to reconcile our own health data. Um, there may be a lot of different specialists with a lot of different opinions or other types of providers we may encounter in the course of considering different options. But to have the full picture, we have to talk to our providers about research opportunities that may be out there that could be beneficial. Unfortunately, our providers may not know about all
Mhm.
those research opportunities. And so looking back to advocacy groups and other
Mhm.
organizations that can be our allies to
Mhm.
fill in those knowledge gaps for ourselves so that
Mhm.
we can go back to our doctors and have better informed conversations together about treatment and about research. If
Mhm.
there is a research study that feels like it might be right,
Mhm.
understanding what the schedule of events looks like so that you know what types of procedures and commitments are
Mhm.
involved, the long-term
Mhm.
follow-up, and making sure that you have that trust and safety you deserve around what happens if I don't feel right? Who do I
Yeah.
call and what happens next?
Mhm.
One quick anecdote on this. Years ago, we had done these we had done these trial simulations we were doing at the time, running different stakeholders through mock clinical trials in a clinical setting. We actually did them at NYU Medical Center, and for one of them, we had the fortune to bring in innovation leaders from other companies,
Mhm.
from Disney and Starbucks and Delta Airlines and Fidelity Banking and all these different folks, innovation leaders came in and they were either participants in a trial or they were study coordinators. And when we were debriefing afterward, I'll never forget, it was somebody from Fidelity, the bank, that said, when you're using our banking app, they said, it's secure. We've got tons of security features, but we also put a lot of features in the app that make you feel like it's secure because you can't see security, right? So,
Mhm.
yeah, there's a little padlock that closes or opens, and this might blink red because we want you to see it and feel it to
Feel.
make it visceral. What do you
Mhm.
do in your clinical trial that makes a person feel that it's secure? We
Mhm.
have an army of people working, monitoring the safety of our trials that are constantly looking at data. Hundreds and hundreds of people are looking at the data, monitoring it for safety, and they're doing it behind a curtain. The patient
Mhm.
has no idea that they're there. And so,
Mhm.
how do we take that sentiment of helping people to feel that it's secure? Yes, it's secure. We've put in place 101
Mhm.
procedures monitor,
Mhm.
and there are
Mhm.
people that are working around the clock, but how do we help that person to see it? Now, as a patient, they should ask those questions. And for
Mhm.
us as sponsors and research institutions, how do we help people to see and
Mhm.
feel what infrastructure we've put in place to make sure they're protected?
Yeah. No, I agree. I mean, that's a great anecdote. Thanks for sharing that because yes, I mean, unless it's visible, I mean, most of the time people don't know this, what's going on in the background, and other industries have understood that. And that's where all that user experience comes into play, that you have to understand how your patients are thinking. And for that, you need to first talk to them and have all these open conversations and understand, and then design from that way and approach and have a two-way communication going on. So I mean, I know we are kind of and near the end of this, so it's just a couple more questions. You know how people who either get married or don't, or they have or have kids or don't, either ways they have advice for other people, right? I mean, whatever, sometimes it's unsolicited or sometimes it's asked for. What would be your advice for people who are thinking about getting into clinical research?
I would say if they're thinking about coming into clinical research, this is a fabulous industry in which to engage. It's meaningful, it's purposeful, it's impactful. For
Mhm.
me, the things that I've always been drawn to are around science and technology. So if you're a STEM kid, right,
Mhm.
this is like this exciting convergence. There's always new science in terms of the medicines that we're interacting with and the mechanisms they're impacting. And there's always new technology in terms of the
Mhm.
tools that we're using to test and understand what's working and what doesn't. And
Mhm.
unlike, some other career paths where maybe you're intersecting with cool tech, this one all culminates in helping other humans to feel
Mhm.
better, to live
Mhm.
better. And so,
Mhm.
what a great way to spend your time at this intersection of science and technology for a
Mhm.
purpose.
Yeah, no, I agree. Yes, I mean, I jokingly say this, that yes, we are more than mad scientists, right? We are not somebody just cooking up potions or whatever, like, Frankenstein model. Like, no, that's not how it goes. There's a lot of cool stuff that goes on, but it isn't that visible. And so we need to work more towards, because yes, I have a lot of younger nieces and nephew who actually, that was also a part of, getting to this podcast, is kind of talking to those people who are upcoming in this industry and are considering being a part of this industry, but have no idea what they're getting into. But it has changed. You're right. Initially, in earlier days, many of us landed into it, well, by luck, I would say, rather than accident. Luck sounds better.
I'll call it luck and fate. How's that?
Yes. So, but it has improved. There are a lot of courses out there. And so, yes, there is a right way of doing this too. And it is a cool industry. I agree. So now one kind of last question. It's a different way of asking, what would you tell your younger self? Imagine your future self, and what would that future self tell your current being?
I hinted at this earlier, but there's that sentiment of the serenity prayer and appreciating, accepting the things that you can't change and changing the things that you can. There are some forces, there are stakeholders, there are individuals who aren't going to want to change, and that's okay. Leave them where they are, and focus on the spaces that want to change, and then go there and do amazing things. The others will either follow along, or they'll stay in place and end up left behind. But whichever way, you can't decide that for them. So focus your energy with those that want to go on that journey with you.
No, that's a great piece of advice. And so that's awesome. Thanks, Craig. Any closing thoughts that you wanted to share within?
No, it's a fabulous conversation. I'm really excited to get to share this time with you here today, and looking forward to seeing where the rest of your conversations lead you. Thanks so much for creating this space.
Awesome. Thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed, and thanks for your support on this and your guidance on this, and thank you for being I don't know, well, I don't know how to say it, but yeah, thanks for being supportive. I was gonna say, like, thanks for being an early adopter, because this is a new venture that I'm kind of working on, and so thanks for always being that support of new things and new ways of people trying out, and so I appreciate that about you.
You don't know until you try, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Thanks for listening to People of Medicine. Like, share, and subscribe to show your support for our work, and stay tuned for more inspiring stories and conversations. Until next time, remember, the world of modern medicine is not just about data and results. It's about people.